So guys, day 3 here at the King's Casino. Today I will be playing another 2-5 session because that's the lowest limit they offer here. And yeah, let's hop right into the action here.
Okay guys, no intro for this video. There will be a ton of action, so let's hop right into the game. We are in the game for €507 now, playing another 2-5 session, and let's go into the first hand. Here we see a raise from the +1 player to 20, who seems to have very loose tendencies. The button before me calls, and I'm in the big blind with ace-10 offsuit. I don't want to play this as a call and play this hand out of position multi-way, and there is a chance I can steal the dead money away pre-flop. So I 3-bet squeeze to 80. The +1 player has other ideas and calls my 3-bet, but at least the button gets out of the way. So we see a flop heads up of queen 10-5 with 2 spades. I decide to take a passive route and check to my opponent, since this board should hit his 3-bet calling range kinda hard. He decides to bet 100 now. There is no way I had the intention to fold here to 1-bet, so I decide to call and we see a turn. It brings in an offsuit 4 and I decide to play in flow now and check to my opponent. He checks back on this turn, which makes me feel kinda comfortable again, and we see a river in form of the 5 of spades. So it completes the obvious front door flush draw, but given the tendencies of my opponent so far, I think he would bet his draw on the turn as well. I decide to check to my opponent again, and let's see what he wants to do. He bets 150 now. I go into the tank for a little bit. Versus other kind of opponents, I think I should lean towards a fold more often here, but versus his loose tendencies, I think I can call here sometimes as well. I don't think he would play a queen this way, so he may has a flush here, or he has some sort of missed straight draw, or maybe an underpair which he turns into a bluff. I don't love this spot, but because of the named reasons, I think I have to call here, and that's what I do after some time. And my opponent shows 7 deuce offsuit. Okay, there is no 7 deuce game on this table, so I don't know what he was thinking, but I'll take it, and we scoop in a very nice pot. In the next one, we are in the cutoff with pocket 8s. The under the gun player raises to 15, the hijack before me calls, I decide to call, and it falls to the small blind, who decides to squeeze. He 3-bets to 60. Under the gun calls, the hijack calls, and that gives me a very good price to call with my pocket 8s here, and that's what I do. So we see a flop 4 ways already in a bloated pot, and the dealer rolls over ace 9 deuce rainbow. Unfortunately, no set for us in this multi-way 3-bet pot, but somehow the action checks through. So we see a turn and it brings in a miracle 8 of diamonds. So we get there with our set. Unbelievable. The small blind checks, and even better news, the under the gun player now bets 60. The hijack folds, and since there is a flush draw on board and some possible straight draws, I don't want to slow play this, so I raise to 150. The small blind folds, and under the gun, who only has 170 total behind, raises all in for 170. I call the €10 more and we go to a run out. But before that, he asks me if we want to run it twice. Whatever my opponent wants to do, so we run it twice this time. The first board comes an ace, the second one comes a 4 of diamonds. I'm not sure if I'm still good here on the second board, but we are, because my opponent had Jack 10 offsuit. He said something about he is really tilted, he just busted the tournament, and fortunate for us, his tilt is still present on the cash time tables, and we scoop in another very nice pot. So we are sitting now at over 1.1k in our stack, and we gained some confidence. And here in the next hand, I'm in the cutoff with Jack 10 offsuit, and the hijack before me, who is one of the weaker player at the table, raises to 15. I want to get involved in hands with him, and so I decide to call a little light here in position, but that invites the button and the small blind to call as well, and we see a flop 4 ways. The flop comes king 9-3 with 2 hearts and 1 club. So we flop ourselves a gut shot and a backdoor flush draw. The small blind checks and the hijack c-bets for 20. With my equity I just mentioned, I decide to call, and the button and the small blind fold. So we see a turn only heads up now, and it brings in another 9. This card should definitely better for my range than it should be for the hijack's range, but he keeps betting. He bets 35. Pretty small, and since there are way more 9s in my range and I still have the gut shot out with the queen, I guess, I want to imply some pressure here on one pair type holdings like king X or maybe weaker pairs than the king, so I raise now. I raise to 110. I really like my play, but the hijack seems to like my play as well, and he raises again to 300. I couldn't fold quick enough and my opponent shows me pocket kings. Oops. Really lucky for us, he did not slow play us. Maybe I find another bet and lose a very big one here. Anyway, on to the next one. The game is pretty action heavy and we will see that in the next 3 following hands, which happened back to back to back. In the first one, I'm in the hijack with ace jack and the low jack before me raises to 15. I 3-bet to 45, it folds to the small blind who 4-bets to 150. We both fold and go on to the next one. Right in the next hand, we get dealt ace king. We are on the low jack now and we see one limp before me and I raise to 20. The cutoff behind me re-raises to 60. It folds back to me, and since this is a very loose table, I don't want to call this, especially out of position, so I 4-bet to 145. The cutoff folds and shows us ace 9 of hearts. We are friendly to each other, so I show him that I have the goods here with ace king, and we are on to the next one. In the very next hand after that, so back to back to back hands, we have ace jack offsuit again. Now in middle position, and we see a limp before me, and I raise to 20. There is one caller on the button, it folds to the limper, who now raises to 130. Oh my god, this action on this table here. We fold this one because limp raises from early position screams strength to me, and ace jack offsuit isn't the best hand to defend here, so I fold and we are on to the next one. This crazy action continues in the next hand as well. We are in the low jack now with pocket queens and we see a limp from under the gun. The middle position player, who is the weaker player I mentioned before, raises to 30 now. I 3-bet here to 80. I keep it on the smaller side and it folds back to the middle position, who jams, but only jams for 195 euro effective. Of course I call and we see a run out, no more action. We actually turn over our hands and he shows us pocket aces. Of course, we are off to a run out and the flop comes king, jack, 10, all clubs. So we actually have an open-ended straight flush draw and our opponent doesn't have the ace of clubs, so we actually are very alive here. So please dealer, help us out here. The turn brings in the 8 of diamonds, unfortunately, and the river brings in the 3 of diamonds. So we brick completely. Unfortunately, we lose this one, but luckily for us, he only has 200 euro behind. We could lose a much bigger pot. On to the next hand. Here we are on the cutoff with king 9 of hearts. +1 limps and it folds to me and I raise to 20. It folds to the +1 player who calls. We see a flop of king 5 deuce rainbow, so pretty nice flop for us, but surprisingly the +1 player donk leads for 30. With my top pair I will never fold here, so I decide to call and we see a turn in form of an offsuit 4. He checks to me now and I decide to check back. We see a 10 on the river and my opponent checks again. I should definitely go for value here, but on the other hand I want to get some information about the +1 player who seems very tight so far, and I'm pretty interested on what kind of hands he donk leads on this flop here. So I check back to get some information and he shows us pocket 8s. So not really sure what went through his mind, but we take down the small pot and go on to the next one. The next hand is the biggest hand I played in all 3 days of the King's Trip. So here we are in the low jack with pocket 5s. It folds to me and I raise to 15. The cutoff behind me 3-bets to 45. The button behind him decides to cold call the 3-bet and it folds back to me. I'm getting a very good price now, even though I'm out of position. I call the 45 to set mine here and we go to a flop 3 ways. The dealer rolls over 5 4-4. So we flop a full house in a 3-bet pot in a bloated pot already. I'm first to act, and of course I check to my opponents. Luckily for us, the cutoff decides to c-bet. He bets 50. The button decides to call. Now I have a decision. Do I want to raise here or play it a little tricky and just call? It was 50-50 in my mind, to be honest, but ultimately at the end I decided to raise here because all of the involved players are at around 800 euro deep. So I want to build a pot now and I raise to 150. The cutoff folds, but the button decides to call. Pretty good news. So we see a turn. The turn brings in another 4. So there are trips on the board right now and I'm not sure if that's a good card or a bad card for me. I really hope my opponent has an overpair now and should feel pretty confident. I decide to play it a little tricky here and make it look like I have a combo draw or maybe a flush draw that I'm now afraid of the trips on board. So I check to my opponent. Unfortunately, my opponent checks back. We see the king of clubs on the river and it completes the front door flush draw. Now I really hope my opponent has a king. The question is now how much I want to bet. I'm really nervous and I think my hands are a little shaky at this moment. I thought about jamming but then ultimately decide to bet 375. Before we see what our opponent will do here in this hand, guys, smash that subscribe button and leave a like under the video. It would help me and the channel a lot. And yeah, now let's see what my opponent does. He snap calls. Oh my god, I turn over pocket 5s and he rolls over ace 7 of clubs. I don't mind, I love to see that he called this bet and my check back on the turn really earned us some money here on the river and we are good and happy now. And there are some more hands that we played in this session, so let's go over it. In the next one, I'm under the gun +1 and the player before me limps. I decide to ISO raise here to 20 and the cutoff behind me calls, but the limper folds. So we still go heads up to a flop of queen 10 deuce with 1 club. I only have 5 high here, but there are many turns that improve my hand and I can barrel on. And I don't want to give up the betting lead here right now, so I bet 17. The cutoff calls. We see the 3 of spades on the turn and that is one of the cards I had in mind that improved my hand to an open-ended straight draw. I continue barreling now and size up and bet 55 now. After some time he folds and we take this down with 5 high. In the last hand I want to go over, we are in the cutoff with ace jack offsuit. Probably the hand I got dealt most of the time in this session. Yeah, but anyway, we see a raise from under the gun to 15, the hijack calls and I'm next to act. I could call here as well, but I prefer the aggressive route and 3-bet here and I 3-bet to 55. Under the gun folds, but the hijack calls. We see a flop of ace 6-3 with 2 spades. After the hijack checks to me, I bet 45 and after some time of consideration he finds a fold. So we take down this pot relatively uncontested, feeling pretty good. And that was the last hand of the session and we hop right into the session update. So guys, back at our beautiful Airbnb, short session update. Pretty good session. In the game for 507 and out of the game for 1475. Profit of 968. Amazing 2-5 session. Whew, let's go. Thanks for watching, guys. See you next time.